Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the People in Fundraising conversation series, where I invite people from my nonprofit network onto the program to discuss both their career journey as well as share insights into who they are as a person, because that puts the people in fundraising, which is the purpose of this 18-month-old initiative. We're in season 2, and today I'm really excited to welcome Erin Lawler and Chris Lawler to our program. Hi to you both.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Tim. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you both. And as a way of introduction, I worked with Erin at Harvard Business School for probably 15-ish years. Mm-hmm. She is currently the Senior Director of Donor Relations at Harvard Business School, or HBS. And Chris, I knew through NEDRA, the New England Development Research Association. He is currently the Director of Development Research at Harvard Medical School, HMS. And I also knew of Chris because he and Erin are married. And I think it'd be really cool, as I thought about who I'd want to have on the program, to highlight some people where both people in a relationship work in nonprofit. And particularly for the two of you, where you are in donor relations, Erin, and prospect research development, Chris. I'm excited for our conversation today. So thank you for your time. Sorry?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, my pleasure. As I often do with each episode, I would like to start by having our guests share with us for a few minutes how they entered the nonprofit field. Chris is going to answer first with his experience, and then we'll go to Erin, and then we'll go on from there. So take it away, Chris, please.
Yeah, so probably like a lot of people, when I was graduating college, didn't really have a clear picture of what I wanted to do, what sort of field I would want to work in. Mm-hmm. I had this vague, perhaps at the time, very ill-informed, naive picture of what sort of the two worlds were. You know, you either went to work for a corporation or a for-profit entity or a not-for-profit. And those were the two distinctions I all had in my head. Mm. And, you know, I probably through things I studied in college and biases, you know, through the music I listened to and things like that, I sort of had a bias against, like, you know, corporations are only out for money and things like that. So I already had this sort of sensibility of, like, I'm going to go work for a mission-driven organization, even though I had never worked in that sector at all. Mm-hmm. And of course, I didn't have a job lined up, so I took, like a lot of people do, temp jobs right out of college. And I did do a bunch of assignments that were sort of with typical, you know, financial services kind of companies, other large institutions. And it was, you know, it was fine. It was work that paid. I needed money at the time. But I did ask, I ended up signing up with a different temp agency, and they started placing me with mostly not-for-profits. So I started doing some roles at, one time I did a sort of month-long role at like a small kind of housing shelter initiative in Boston in the South End. And then I went, my first exposure to development was in the Boston College development office, where I spent probably my longest temp run with any organization at the time. And I kind of, you know, I was kind of used in a lot of different ways. You know, I did everything from mailings to, I did actually volunteer for a short stint with the Prospect Research Office doing very random, like, I think I was like doing physical screenings of, you know, of periodicals and publications. I was handed, you know, go look this person up, database, that kind of stuff, old time screening. and that was my initial exposure really to that world. And that was kind of, I started to formulate this idea of like, oh, like I do like this idea of kind of working for an institution that the ultimate mission is something beyond just sort of turning a profit or selling a product or whatever. So I ended up applying for a role at a wonderful organization that's still around called the Union of Concerned Scientists, based in Cambridge, Mass. Sort of advocacy group that does a lot of work around climate change, environmental advocacy issues, sort of informing scientific policy around, everywhere from climate to nuclear power to arms control issues, the whole breadth of issues. And I took an entry-level job, not in development specifically, just as like an admin person, like answering phones, sorting mail, and then subsequently working there for about maybe 6 to 8 months. A development assistant position in the development team opened up, and I took that, which was really my kind of foray into development as it was.
Okay.
That was nearly 25 years ago now. So.
Oh, wow.
So, I've stuck around quite a bit in the profession.
And how long have you been at HMS, Chris?
I joined Harvard Medical School in January of 2017.
Oh, okay.
A little over six and a half years now.
Awesome. And between Union of Concerned Scientists and HMS, just briefly where...
Yeah, so between that period of time was spent in the University Development Office at the Central Harvard University Development and Alumni Affairs Office. I was there for 10 plus years.
Oh, dynamite.
In their prospect research team there with several luminary folks in the prospect development world, Amy Begg, Dina Zalecki, lots of other wonderful folks who are still in the fundraising world.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris, for going through your career into nonprofits. Erin, we'll turn the time over to you, please.
Sure. So I think this goes as far back as when I was an undergraduate at Villanova University in Philly. My senior year, I applied for an internship working for the university in their public relations office. And I really, really enjoyed that experience. I was there for a whole semester, so the spring semester of my senior year. I was able to work on some really great projects with my alma mater. And that kind of, now that I think back, really piqued my interest in working for a college or a university. It wasn't something I went for right away. I did go into public relations for corporations after I graduated from college. I worked for a women's clothing company, and I also worked for a high-tech public relations firm during like the .com boom. It's very much dating me at this point, but intense environment. And ultimately I decided I just didn't really love the for-profit world, and I wanted to get back to that university college environment. So while I was at the PR firm, I was getting my master's in integrated marketing communication in downtown Boston, and trying to figure out my next move. And a big piece of my journey was really figuring out, okay, what skills do I have? And what are my transferable skills, and what are my interests, and how does that dovetail to nonprofit? And I think, I had never heard of donor relations. I didn't really know what it was. It had the word relations in it, and I did public relations. So I started to explore that a little bit more, and just being in Boston, it ended up being higher ed because there's just so many institutions. So I was thinking about, writing and messaging strategy and event management and all the things I was doing. And it really seemed to be that donor relations was an up and coming area. And I could really kind of get in to that industry as it was growing, which turned out to be true. So that's been a nice discovery for me.
Yeah.
So, I think being in Boston, I quit my job at the PR firm, but I didn't have a job lined up. So actually, just like Chris, I started as a temp, and I think you too, Tim, correct?
Yes.
So, yeah, so former temps. So I actually found a agency that only worked at Harvard. I forget what it was called, but I signed up with them and took like my typing test. And then they placed me at Radcliffe. And at Radcliffe, I did the payroll, which is hilarious because I'm an English major and I have no business doing anyone's payroll, but they trusted me. And through that opportunity, I was able to kind of get to know a few people, in the Harvard world. And it just so happened a position came up at Harvard Business School in the donor relations office for their first ever staff assistant. And I was employee number 2. So there were 2 of us. And that was back in 2002. So I've been at Harvard in the donor relations office at Harvard Business School for 21 years now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And it just brings back some memories of the time that we worked together. And Erin, I remember maybe your first workstation, like it was like just a bunch of walls, like you were facing the wall.
Yeah. So, it was a former copy room that
That's right.
Yeah, that's how high up on the rung I was. It was like office space, they put the guy in the basement. But yeah, they had to move a bunch of copiers so they could kind of slide a desk into this random alcove for me to work in. Yeah.
I remember that Kate Osterman also worked in that space.
She did. Yeah. Yes, she did. That was when I moved up, I got to move out of the copy room.
Well, to your point, Erin, about the donor relations sector being at that burgeoning onset and when you entered the field, like the donor relations team at HBS just grew leaps and bounds in the time that you and I overlapped. And it's just exciting.
Yeah, it's still growing.
That's awesome. And I think it speaks well, certainly for the institution, but also kind of symbiotically for the both of you and the skills you bring to these roles, that you have been at Harvard, writ large, for so long in your careers. And I spent 18 years there myself. And so I drank the Kool-Aid as well, but in a good way, like just the opportunities, the resources, the networking, and seeing some of the best practices that you can then take elsewhere, or even just share with people in our sectors. It's really rich. So very cool.
Yeah, it's been a great experience. I will say, I always joke with my team that I've been at HBS in the same department for 21 years, but I've had like 23 jobs. It's just such a, it's never boring. It's always busy. There's always something more we could be doing. And it just, it could go on forever, infinitely. I mean, there's just, you've got to make some really tough decisions too of what you are and are not going to be doing. And we're very fortunate to have really, really generous donors and lots of them. But of course, that means you have to be able to scale everything. And that can be challenging.
Yes, definitely. So on that comment about scaling, Chris and Erin, if you could just quickly share how many people work with you, report up to you, please.
Sure. We're a relatively smaller operation at Harvard Medical School. It's just myself and then 2 other researchers that report into me directly. And that's just a reflection of the entire alumni affairs and development operation at the medical school were 55 folks fully staffed. So
Okay.
much smaller, as Erin will describe it. The business school is just a much larger operation. So
Yeah.
So at the business school right now, I have 13 people in my department,
Wow.
including myself. 3 of those are part-time. So, I'd say 13 people, but not 13 full-time employees.
Oh, okay. Dynamite. My next question kind of still is in that realm of Harvard and your tenures there. I try to, in my reading for work and outside of work, find quotes from people that I then think, oh, I would love to work that into a conversation. And I still get Harvard Magazine because I'm a extension school alum. And so this quote is from the former president, Larry Bacow. And forgive me if I pronounced his surname wrong. I moved out of New England after he.
That's right. You got it.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. So given again your longevity at Harvard, I'd like to get your reaction to a quote from President Bacow. And he said last December that being a loving critic of our institutions and our communities requires a great deal from us. Though we need to be respectful of our traditions, we should not be unwilling to depart from them. Similarly, we have to be willing to ask difficult questions. And Erin, I think you may have touched on perhaps an answer as you were talking about your career, where you said being aware of things that we shouldn't do in our day-to-day jobs and refining processes. So Chris and Erin, if you want to both take a few moments to address any thoughts that come to mind as you heard that quote, please.
So I love this quote. I might stick it up on the wall at work. So thank you for that. I think it's something we strive to do every day at HBS, at least in the donor relations office. I think I personally always feel the need to constantly innovate and ask why. Why are we doing this? Is this something that should continue? And be creative and change the way things are done or change our products, but also be very cognizant and aware of the culture of the place and preserving that, right? So there's a reason why people feel such a strong affinity to our institution. So we want to make sure we're doubling down and focusing on that, but also evolving with the times, with the industry at large. And frankly, we are a school that teaches leadership, innovation, disruption. And so we also have to practice what we preach, or practice what we teach, I'll say. And so, I don't think there's a day that goes by in our office where someone isn't questioning something, right?
Yeah.
Name it, either in external relations, which is our kind of umbrella group, HBS, HU, Harvard University, where we're thinking, is this something that should be done? Can we do it better? And I think that that's a really important mindset to have when you're in the business that we're in, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that whole piece that Larry wrote is really pretty interesting. I went back and reread it after you had alluded to it. I think it is such an interesting thing, because working for a place like Harvard, it's like Larry alluded to, like it's the two ends of the spectrum. Like people either are very quick and willing and happy to criticize, and that Harvard can't do anything right, or is too old and stodgy, can't innovate, and like all those things. Like some of the things are true, having been in the institution for a while. Like it's a complicated, messy institution.
Yeah,
that's probably not terribly out of the ordinary for an organization of its both the scale it's been around for how old it is, at least within the context of the US, and just the sort of complexity of all the parts, particularly at a place like Harvard Medical School, where we have relationships with affiliate hospitals who partner, as teaching extensions of the medical school's mission to train physicians and healthcare professionals, but they're their own separate institutions as well that have their own fundraising goals, have their own fundraising, initiatives. So it's messy and complicated, and I think it is naive, as Larry points out, to not sort of question or criticize, or at least criticize in a healthy way.
Yeah.
How things are done at Harvard all the time is not always perfect. And I think as Erin said, like, if Harvard wants to sort of put out in the world that it is a place of innovation, which I think it is, for sure, it does need to sort of also speak to that in its own culture and the way it organizes itself, which I think is the frustration sometimes of folks like us that work within the system and within a broader sort of larger structure, is that it can get complicated and messy and bureaucratic at times. And people just have to acknowledge that and say, but what can we do better, and how can we sort of at least start to make the changes towards making things more efficient, and perhaps allowing folks to collaborate more, which certainly I imagine Erin would attest to, and you probably saw it during your tenure at the business school, that there definitely is a more of a culture now for people sort of collaborating more across schools, at least within the development universe, than ever probably originally what existed when we all first arrived at Harvard, where it was much more siloed. And at least now I get the sense, I don't know if I'm being overly naive, but that people do try to collaborate more and try to think in a more like donor centric perspective, where that if you're an alumnus of any school at Harvard, you can have multiple interests that maybe span across various schools, and that if you're a serious philanthropist, you should be allowed, and there should be a freedom to explore those various options, and where those things you could support philanthropically those things across an array of things that are going on at a very nuanced and complex place like Harvard. So but yes, I wholeheartedly agree with Larry's sort of approach that you have to walk that line at a place like Harvard, where you both need to, as Erin alluded to, respect the traditions that exist at Harvard. It's got this rich and amazing history, some things that are not so great but things that we have to acknowledge about Harvard's past. But that also the sort of some of the complexities need to be challenged, and that people need to sort of acknowledge those and say, like, but what can we do to innovate and be sort of more forward thinking in how we do things at a place like Harvard, which can often rest on its laurels, where it's easy to do things that work for a while until they don't, right? So you have to sort of explore new ways of doing things.
Definitely. And as you both were talking, I was thinking about some instances where the collaboration kind of across the university was not great. So like when I was on the research team at HBS, I remember like sort of a in Teal Hall vibe of, well, why is this HBS alum and significant donor appearing on like the top 5 prospect list at the School of Education, for example? And just sort of for such a complex organization, managing those really significant relationships in a way that is putting the donor first as opposed to the institutional need. So it's great to hear that there's more of a donor-centric model with a lot more collaboration at this point than when I was there.
For sure. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's definitely happening. And I think the lines of communication are more open too. So like with your example, I feel like sometimes those names would appear on lists, but the HBS prospect manager wouldn't know that they're on it, which was like, why are they on this? No one called me. And so now I feel like at least there's a real encouragement for people across different offices to be talking to each other and mechanisms to do that.
Yeah.
It's perfect, probably not, but I don't manage prospects, so I can't speak to that as closely as maybe some of my colleagues could.
Excellent. Well, on that topic, I typically are listening for keywords that guests drop in conversation and try and segue to other questions. You mentioned just now talking and communicating. So my next question is for you as a couple. So, typically, you come home from work or you leave a workspace at your home because you're both working hybrid. And, common question, hey, how was your work day? So since you both work in both the nonprofit sector and at Harvard, I wonder, do you have any rules or any parameters about how you answer that question? So.
It's kind of funny. We don't really talk about work very much as a couple. I think there's just so much more in our lives to talk about, including our two kids, and they're younger, so there's a lot of logistics conversation in our house about who's picking up who and have we registered for soccer. And so I think when we do talk about work, what's really lovely is that I could say prospect manager, or he could say rating, and we get the terminology and the lingo, and so that's really nice. And that I'll speak for myself. I don't have to explain to Chris like, oh, well, there's this thing, and like, usually when I talk about work, it's because I can't help but take something home with me that's like bugging me, or I've had a tough day. And he'll be like, oh, was it this thing? And I'm like, yeah, and I'll explain, and he gets what I mean when I use all the either fundraising or Harvard terminology, which is really nice. It didn't start out that way. I think I was at Harvard for a couple of years before Chris joined, and once he did, it was kind of nice that we could just kind of speak in shorthand.
Yes.
So that's really nice, but I wouldn't say there's any like rules. Would you?
No, not really. I mean, I don't think very rarely have we ever sort of, I don't know, specifically talked about occasionally like this person that might overlap in your universe might come up or something like, and I think we're obviously both mindful, like if there's, I don't know, information that's confidential or shouldn't really be chatting about either way with each other. I think we're sensitive to that kind of thing for sure. But it is interesting from that perspective. On the flip side, since we all sort of at Harvard use a common database, most people know like what's happening now. Again, to go harken back to that issue of like collaboration across schools. At the very least, most schools, I would say, it's not a perfect thing, are good about putting whatever is in contact has transpired with prospects in the system. So there's some shared understanding of like what's happening with prospects across that have interests or overlap across multiple schools. So on occasion, our universes might overlap in that kind of very specific way. But it's relatively rare, and I don't think we talk about it that often.
One thing we do though is, if I have a colleague at HBS who's struggling with something related to prospect research or is looking for a resource or something, like I will put them in touch with Chris or ask Chris and then say, oh, Chris says to use this.
Yeah.
And vice versa. Like Chris will put his donor relations friends in contact with me. And so that's kind of nice that we can, at least if we don't have the expertise and our spouse does, we can put our friends in touch with our spouse.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Next question here. We have about 15 minutes left by my watch, so we may get to cover this one and perhaps one more. I'd love for you both to share, as you're comfortable, about an experience that stretched you as a professional, something that you couldn't have learned at a conference or any type of content, but just something that was like, looking back, like that was a hard lesson to learn, but it stretched me in a good way.
When I thought about something immediately when I saw this question was, and it's not necessarily related to directly to like the actual prospect research kind of work itself, but it's more like management stuff for me.
Yeah.
Has been the most challenging growth promotion kind of experiences for sure, just because it's not, that kind of stuff is not like managing interpersonal relations is not my comfort zone. Like for sure. I'm not particularly great at it. I don't excel at dealing with conflict. And not that some people do, but some people are very good at sort of mediating conflict and things of that sort. And I've just had a few instances professionally as a manager over time where I've had to sort of figure out how to get people to just like work more effectively together that were really struggling. And that's hard. It's really hard to help mediate that stuff because you're dealing with personalities and people's different personalities in terms of how they perceive feedback and how they take it in. And it's just hard. And that really, I think, stretched me professionally. And it led me to kind of seeking guidance and counsel from like much more experienced managers than I ever were at the time. Just to get their coaching and guidance, like how would you deal with this situation? So
Sure.
That was something that came to mind for me for sure, because that side of the coin I feel like it's just hard in life.
Hard.
It's whether it's a professional conflict or stuff in our family with our children, wherever it is, like that kind of thing is not easy.
Definitely. I'm with you with the conflict avoidance, personally and professionally. That's just, I don't know. Erin, how about you?
I was trying to think about this. I think, well, I have two answers. So one is more personal, which is, I think, adjusting to life as a working parent. Was very difficult. And then rolling into COVID, working as a working parent was probably the most challenging time in I think both of our, I'll say my career. We had a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old when COVID hit. So there was no like Zoom preschool. And we had 2 jobs, 2 kids. We lived in 1,600 square feet. We, had to be teachers and hairdressers and chefs and all of the things that needed to be done in our household with no help because we have no local family, and try to get our jobs done in a completely new, ever-changing environment. And that was really, really tough. I think I'm still suffering the effects of that one. It was, and I think, in my world, we had to change the way we did everything. Everything had to be done virtually, and we built a lot of really amazing products and tools that we still are using now post pandemic. So it was well worth the effort, but it would have been a lot of work without having your entire family in the house all day and trying to be a public school teacher in your 5 minutes between meetings. So I think that really stretched me for sure. And then kind of a strictly professional angle answer is, I think every time I've taken on more, meaning, I have had progressive growth over a 21-year period at HBS. And with every step that I've taken, I've, been given more responsibility, more people, more areas to oversee. And that can, throw you for a loop and keep you really challenged and engaged for an extended period of time. So as background, I really started more in stewardship communications. Then I took over restricted fund establishment, management, and spending.
Wow.
And now I have also donor engagement and recognition.
Wow.
So all of those things combined, it's a lot of taking one hat off and putting the other hat on. And, I could go from a meeting about the endowment to a meeting about, who knows what, how to enter a specific type of gift in the system to, how to communicate to donors who, their chair is going to be vacant, something like that. So it's always been a challenge to kind of take in the additional responsibility and incorporate it into your mindset and make sure you're supporting all of the people you need to support in the way that they need it. And a lot of times the people I supervise, their jobs are so different. And their expertise is different and their focus is different. So just, I think from a strictly professional perspective, I think that's always been kind of my most challenging moments have been where I have to learn what I'm doing on the job while trying to help the team, move their work forward and incorporate them into my universe.
Those are both great answers. Thank you. And I think, for me, that interpersonal communication and the managing that would be my probably biggest stretch point. And it was at HBS, and we were a team of 3 for so long, and so communicating and managing up and across, I would say, would be a stretch point for me. And also, Erin, as you talked about taking on new responsibilities and different hats and managing, communicating across, I couldn't help but think there are parallels to parenting. Yeah, you're taking on a new responsibility as a first-time parent, then with 2 kids, you're learning it all over again, and one's needs are very different from another's and personalities. So, yeah.
There's so many parallels. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yes. We have just a few more minutes left, and I want to get to this last question here about your first professional example of leadership and what you learned from that person. So, Chris, if you'd like to go first, please.
Yeah, sure. This one that came to mind, I had a manager, this was earlier in my career, who was sort of the head of the development operation. And at the time I had the role I was in morphed into this sort of unique hybrid role at the time, where I was essentially kind of the researcher person and managing a very modest but real plan giving program.
Oh,
it's mostly it consisted of a subset of donors that had set up charitable gift annuities and some folks that included the organization in their wills via bequest intentions. So it was this sort of strange but related hybrid role that I was operating in.
Yeah.
I didn't really know, to be honest, I'm very surprised that I was given the keys to managing the gift planning stuff, because I didn't have a lot of experience doing that work. I did learn some of it on the fly. I did go to sort of training sessions run by some of the local groups here in New England, Plan Giving Group of New England, sort of the counterpart to NEDRA in the plan giving worlds. But in any case, I was running this small program of gift annuity funds that, again, for those who might not know exactly the mechanics of that type of gift, it's, folks can make a gift to a charity, receive a stream of income back during their lifetime, that it's a steady stream of income with a charitable gift annuity. It doesn't change.
Yeah.
And then at the sort of expiration, when they pass on, they relieve the remainder to the charity for the benefit of the charity's mission. And it's a sort of weird sort of charitable gift in a way, because you're the chief financial officer of the organization at the time was very skeptical of this as like, how is this a viable charitable gift, essentially? And there was huge worry on her part as a finance person. And she, to be fair, she was largely right, that everyone that established them with the organization was living like quite long. Like they were living like well into their 90s. And it's like, when are we ever going to realize these gifts?
Yes.
And she really kind of pushed the development director, who I was reporting into, like, what is the point of this whole program? And she was she was a little bit aggressive about it. And I was like this 20-something-year-old kid, and I was like, I don't know how to defend this. I'm not equipped to deal with this. But my manager at the time was really amazing. Like, he sort of stepped up and really kind of defended the program, defended like all the work that had been done. I mean, a lot of it was prior to my time, but I was sort of shepherding this program along and helped facilitate a few larger gifts at the time that had come in through the program. And I don't know, just that sort of defender of like what development is to a person who didn't understand it, quite the nuances of it. I found that really commendable. And I thought he was like a real champion, both for me professionally at the time, because I was very naive and young and earlier in my career. And that was kind of inspiring for me to see someone else kind of step up and really like kind of say like, no, like this, it does matter. Like this is, it might not mean something to the organization now, but it will help the organization in the long term. So that was kind of a unique thing that I saw in terms of like seeing someone's leadership, like really in action. And it obviously affected me personally. So it had a bigger impact.
That's such an insightful story, Chris. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's interesting that at that early point in your career, you were exposed to the prospect research, certainly, but also something there's a tangential connection, but it's not specifically in the management and research wheelhouse. And just what you've taken away from that is really impressive. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Erin, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I was trying to think of a good example, and I think for me, so when I came into HBS, I was, I was entry level. I was a staff assistant, and I was hired by a woman named Hannah Peters, who I think, Tim, you remember. Yes. She's now at Brandeis. And I think what was really telling, and what I think I now try to practice myself in my job as a manager, now that I am one, is the idea of trust. And I think for Hannah especially, I mean, I was very young. I was just out of school when I started working at HBS, and she just really trusted me. She just, said, okay, here's this really important stuff, go do it. And I remember kind of thinking like, I'm not qualified to do this. I don't think I should be talking to these donors, like these billionaires. I don't think I should be. And she was like, no, you're fine. Like, go ahead. And the fact that she just really trusted me, and said, you're smart, you're talented, just go forth and do these things, and let me know if you run in. First of all, let me grow exponentially as a professional, where I just had to figure stuff out on the fly and, help build the Donor Delicious program that exists today. It didn't really have any structure to it, or like we stewarded one type of fund and not all the other ones.
Oh,
And so just really kind of like handing the reins over to a 20-something-year-old kid and saying, hey, what do you want to do with this? And I'm like, wait, this is, I'm overwhelmed. This is Harvard Business School. This is a really big deal. These are really important people.
yeah.
And it's just kind of like, yeah, it is, but you've got it. And I think being handed that level of responsibility at such a young age, I think made me feel really invested in the work. And really responsible for the success, or or those not so successful endeavors early on, and really feel, so my hope is that even though our scope is so much larger now and everything's so much more nuanced and matrixed, that I can do a little bit of that with my staff to say, no, you've got it. Like, go ahead, take it on.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the best way to learn the ins and outs of the type of work that we do.
That's such an empowering story, Erin. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, the real gem of it is that you then try to apply it to the next generation coming up as well. So very cool. Well, Chris and Erin, this has been really wonderful for me to reconnect with you both. It's great to see you again, hear your voices, and I'm just honored to have you on as guests today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Tim. It was so good catching up.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And I feel lucky and esteemed to be in amongst the group of folks you've had on. So kudos to you for keeping a good thing going.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a one-man show, and if I could somehow move my laptop, you would see there's what looks like a baseball stadium full of lights surrounding me. So it's all kind of in process here, but I appreciate your remarks, and I'm excited to share your interview with our audience. We'll be airing it this fall of 2023. Around the time of the HBS reunions, Erin, likely. So, and to our audience, thank you for listening, watching, supporting the People in Fundraising program. I appreciate everyone's support in that regard. And we'll be back soon with another interview. So thank you very much.